Excellent. All right, thank you. Assalamu alaikum and good evening, everybody. So at Muslim Votes Matter, we're all about being informed and to be able to make rule change happen. So in today's session, we are actually going to explore and discuss racism in Australia. And this is one of two sessions that we're going to run. Today's topic is focused on Islamophobia. And in 2 weeks, we're actually going to run a topic on anti-Semitism. Now, just before we start, we just want to open with an Islamic dua. So just really briefly, I bear witness that there is no God except Allah, Allah alone without any partners, and I bear witness that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is his servant and messenger. Alhamdulillah, indeed, all praise is due to Allah. We praise him and seek his help and forgiveness. We seek refuge in Allah from the evil of our souls and our wrongdoings. He whom Allah guides, none can misguide, and he whom Allah leaves to go astray, none can guide. Okay, and just before we commence, I'd like to make an acknowledgement of country. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we all respectively meet today and pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. I extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander peoples here with us in this meeting. I'd like to make it known that sovereignty has never been ceded. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. We recognise the past atrocities against Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples on this land, and that Australia was founded on the genocide and dispossession of First Nations people. We acknowledge that colonial structures and policies remain in place today and recognise the ongoing struggles of First Nations people in dismantling those structures. So much of what the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have endured to date is recognisable in the oppression being committed against our brothers and sisters right now in Palestine and the surrounding regions, and its very moment in time. Okay, so what I'd like to do is just quickly introduce to you our speaker. So we're honoured to welcome Dr. Noura Math, who's the Executive Director of Islamophobia, the Islamophobia Registry, to our webinar. Just a quick background into Dr. Noura. She's renowned for her extensive research in religion, multiculturalism and inter-community relations. And she's also earned her PhD from Griffith University, focusing on the responses of Muslim civil society organisations within Australia's socio-political landscape. She's a community leader. She specialises in multiculturalism, interfaith dialogue and human rights advocacy. And her work has earned numerous awards, including the Queensland State finalist for Australian of the Year. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Amath. Really a pleasure to have you, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation that we're about to embark on. And just a little about myself. My name is Maysoon and I'm representing Muslim Vote Matters. I'm one of their key volunteers, which will provide some information about if any of you are interested in also supporting this cause. So Dr. Noura, quite a bit is happening, last week was a big week, and it's probably a never-ending story for you with all the work that you're doing. There's the incidents that happened in Victoria that we were talking about earlier. There's graffiti this morning close to a school in southwestern Sydney. It's just an ongoing saga that we're confronting. But just before we sort of get into the nitty-gritty of this, I just want the audience to really understand more about the Islamophobia Registry. Just give us a bit of background about it. What kind of work do you do? What's the focus of it?
Thank you, Maysoon. And thank you for your beautiful and really sincere acknowledgement of country. I think it's really important and pivotal that, we continue the acknowledgement because as you said, rightfully so, it's the connection really to, First Nations all over the world. There's a deep connection of colonial, settler structures that we'll be talking about very shortly. But before I talk about and I too would like to acknowledge the Yagara and Turrbal people. I'm zooming in from Logan in Queensland, and the First Nations people here are the Yagara, Yugambeh, and Turrbal people, and I want to pay my respect to them as well. Before I perhaps talk about the Islamophobia Register Australia and what we do, perhaps I'll just begin with what Islamophobia is, and
Yeah.
then why we felt a need to respond to it. So, Islamophobia is now we take the definition from the All Party Parliamentary Group on British Muslims, and they came up with this term, which we thought really encapsulates what it is, the phenomenon that that is being experienced by Muslims around the world, and as well as non-Muslims who are for whatever reason might be perceived to be Muslim. Okay, so the definition that is really part of the all party parliamentary group on British Muslims states that Islamophobia is rooted in racism. So while Islam is not a race, and we get this all the time, Islam is not a race. Muslims aren't, a race, and so therefore, how can it be an aspect of racism or a type of racism? But our argument is that the process of racism and the end game of racism, which is discrimination, prejudice, hate crimes, bias, whether conscious or not conscious, the discrimination, the verbal assaults, it's the whole marginalization and racialization of
Mm.
Islam as a monolith is the reason why Islamophobia is the preferred term by many in the academic and the sector circle. So it's rooted in racism is a type of racism that targets expressions of Muslimness or
Mm.
perceived Muslimness. And the reason why that perceived Muslimness is really important, and especially if we're talking about what's happening today, what happened in Gaza, what happened in terms of pro Palestinian supporters, they may not necessarily be Muslim. And we've seen quite a number of incidents reported to us at the register where they're not Muslim, but
Mm.
because they're wearing kafia, they're called you effing Muslim.
Yeah.
What? So that whole intersectionality and
Yes.
this is where that perceived Muslimness and being in solidarity with Muslims or being in solidarity with Islam and people of
Yeah.
Gaza. Therefore, that is that connection. Or a Sikh man wearing a turban. We know
Yes.
that after 9/11, Sikh men were targeted and discriminated against and were assaulted verbally, physically intimidated, also received intimidation because non-Muslims thought that they were Muslim. So it
Mm.
is that perceived Muslimness and what that carries. So all of a sudden, the turban now has become racialized. But in terms of the Islamophobia Register, it was established 10 years ago by a Muslim sister by the name of Marin Vizadeh. Now, Marin Vizadeh had come back from a community forum in Sydney, and at that time there were, incidents of Islamophobia, and people were having conversations about it. This has happened to me. This has happened to me. Mariam herself, had experienced Islamophobia. Her sisters, her mom, her cousins, basically many, many, many Muslim sisters that she, had worked with or engaged with, all had incidents of Islamophobia. And yet it wasn't being tracked anywhere here in Australia. So anecdotally, we knew it was happening,
Yeah.
but we couldn't you can't do much with anecdotes. You need
Yes.
evidence. And being the lawyer that she is, then just really opened up a Facebook page. So on the 17th of September in 2014, she opened up a Facebook page and said, I'm trying to track, incidents of Islamophobia. Please DM me if you've experienced this. And all of a sudden,
Mm.
with a simple Facebook page, she was getting all of this evidence. Now, so the Islamophobia Register has been around for 10 years, but for 8 of those 10 years, it was completely a voluntary organization. So, so Mariam and some of the sisters who were assisting, and some of the brothers who were assisting, would go to their 9 to 5 job and then come home afterwards, ring up victims, do police reports, do victim support, et cetera, after hours. So there wasn't I guess it was more ad hoc based on
Okay.
the volunteers, and it's really been in the last 2.5 years that we've really been able to increase and expand our work. So what is it that we do? The Islamophobia Register is an incident reporting platform. So
Mm.
if you have had an incident of Islamophobia, and perhaps we can talk about some of those, different categories, you can report to us. So you can do it online, you can call us, you can SMS us, you can send to our socials. It'll get to us one way or the other. Once it comes to us, then a victim support officer and our volunteers will ring up that person. We think it's really important that even though you may submit your report to us online, that you get a human voice at the, at the end of it. So we will follow up. One of our volunteers or staff members will call you up to go through report and also to verify the report, because the last thing we want to do is conflate this or make this an issue if it isn't an issue. We want to make sure that the veracity of the data, and perhaps this is me being academic, is
Mm.
paramount. That is not a bot, it's not a prank, it's not just somebody typing up, 20 reports. We verify every single report. So, and there it's quite stringent. So it goes to our victim support team. And if there's a question as to the veracity of it, it comes to me. And then it goes to our academic team. And there are 4 researchers that are part of the academic team that actually codes it. So it's just so very important that the veracity of the data that we are, publicizing, that we are giving, to policymakers, to police, whoever it is, and even the community organizations, that this data has been verified. We then, with that data, obviously, we're able to issue academic reports. And just by way of, I guess, letting you in on I guess a big secret is that we'll be launching the 5th report. So the Islamophobia in Australia report is coming out next month, and we're going to be doing a physical launch of it. And this will be in Sydney. We will be sending invites out. We will also live stream it onto our socials for those that are not able to attend. And we will actually host one just for the community, just for the Muslim community, a safe space for you to ask any questions without media, without any, politicians, with so that you and the researchers can really engage with the data. We also offer support services. So when somebody submits a report to us, a victim support officer calls them, and for some of the victims, that's all that's needed. That somebody,
Mm.
there's a place for them to share their story. That somebody has actually taken time to say, how can we help and what can we do for you?
It's
Then we
acknowledgement
also,
as well, isn't it?
yeah, so we offer victim, we call it wraparound victim support.
Mm.
And so that is mental health support. And you don't need to take it up now. It can be through telehealth, it can be face to face, but these are mental health service providers that we have partnerships with, such as Psych Central and Mission of Hope, or the
Mm.
World Wellness Group here, in Queensland, Mindwise. So we've got them in all the different states to be able to help our victims. You don't have to, take it on now. You may feel like I'm fine, but we've had people come back 6 months later going, that incident that happened to me 6 months ago, I'm still find myself, being re-triggered. Can I see somebody? There's no timeline as to when you can seek services. We'll do submissions to the Human Rights Commission for you. We'll do submissions to the police so that you don't need to go to the police station, because we know how
Okay.
traumatizing that is to go to the police. We know how difficult that is in
And
terms
not
of
not only
language
that, I
processes.
think what
And
you'll find is many
yeah,
people don't even realize that you can go to the police, and that
yep,
there's a reason to
that's
go to the
right.
police.
Yep, or maybe people don't trust the police. I'm
Yeah.
giving my data. I don't know what happens to it. So,
Mm.
and this is what we have found over and over and over again, is that people will not submit it to the police. They'll actually come to us, and we will work with the police in that regard. We
Yeah.
also do and legal support. So, is there something that we can send to Fair Work? Is there something that a law firm, for example, and we do have law firms that we work very closely with that provide support to our victims pro bono. So everything that victims may need is we'd like to think that the register is a one-stop shop where we'll
Mhm.
case manage the incident and ensure that you heal according to your needs. So it's your agency, your control. We will not tell you what you need to do. In fact, we'll offer you these services. That's really important. We also do education. So part of what we're doing today with MVM,
Yes.
part of
Yep.
us going out and conversations. I did training with New South Wales Police last week. I did training with the National Student Ombudsman, with different government departments, with different NGOs, where we want to increase the knowledge of what Islamophobia is and what you can
Yes.
do as a victim as well as a
Great.
bystander. Policy engagement. So we're constantly trying to agitate and to advocate,
Mm,
whatever it to be able to ensure that the voices and lived experience of those who have experienced Islamophobia
mm.
is part of the conversation, and obviously then the advocacy. So over
Very
the 10
comprehensive.
years, probably helped about over 2,000 people,
Wow. Okay.
who've reached out to us over the years. But can I just say that really, I say 2,000 because that's what's been reported to us. It's really the tip of the
Yeah, and
iceberg.
that's what I want. And
The
we'll move
iceberg.
on to
Yeah.
that. So and it's interesting. I actually didn't realize that it's only been around for 10 years, and you can just imagine how much of that previous decade was missed from September 11th, which is my assumption is there were quite a few peaks and troughs there post September
Yeah.
11th. Then there was the Link Cafe, there was the October Bali bombing. So you can just imagine
Yeah.
we've actually missed some big events. So what I'd like to understand, obviously the report is coming out, your fifth report. A few questions. So is that launching soon? Is that something we should be
Yes, that's
looking?
launching next month.
Excellent. Okay.
Next month on the 13th of March to, I know it's
Okay.
Ramadan, and that's why we're not having such a big thing because
Yeah.
it's Ramadan.
Okay. So
But it is to coincide with the UN Day to combat Islamophobia
okay, excellent. So it's part of a global event.
and Christchurch as well.
Right, of course, yes.
Yeah.
So what I'd like to understand is what are the trends that you're seeing? Obviously you've got
Yeah.
10 years worth of data. What are the trends you're seeing? Are the numbers increasing? What's the nature of the incidents that are
Yeah.
occurring as well?
Yeah.
And are they, are certain demographics within the community being impacted more than others? So tell us more about what those trends look like.
Yeah, the reality of Islamophobia has been a phenomenon impacting on Muslims here in Australia well before the 7th of October. I know we like to use,
Mm,
I guess, the parameters of the 7th of October for starting the conversation because there has been a massive increase. But I just want to state that Islamophobic incidents have occurred well before, the 7th of October.
mm.
But what you have to realize with this peak of Islamophobia, especially 3 weeks right after the 7th of October, we had a
Oh,
1,300%
wow.
increase of Islamophobia, right?
Wow.
In 3 weeks after the 7th of October. Now, before that, it would, as you rightfully say, peaked at certain times, especially when there are global events. But it's not necessarily global events, my soon, and this is what is really interesting. I really want to point out that we like to think it's just global events. It's nine
Mm,
eleven. It is the Bali bombing. It is the
mm.
Link Cafe. It is, what happened in the UK or in Sweden or the French, the cartoons. All of this, yes, does is there is connection and there is relation, but it is what political leaders. So it's the rhetoric of political leaders. So it's political rhetoric
Mhm.
that actually has more of an impact on whether we
Interesting.
see the rise of Islamophobia than just the incident themselves.
Right. So it's the
So
reaction of the political government at the
yeah,
time from
so
both sides, I would assume.
if it's divisive rhetoric, if it is to scapegoat, to marginalize, to create and what I call manufactured fear and hysteria of
Yeah.
Muslims, this is when you see the rates of Islamophobia increase. And this
Yeah.
was first studied, in fact, by John Esposito and Dalia Mugahid. I think everybody's really, really, if you followed Islamophobia post 9/11, these two
Mm,
names are very much the main researchers globally on Islamophobia. So Dalia Mugahid and John Esposito, because their hypothesis was that, oh, anytime there's a global
mm,
event, that you'll see the peak. And what they find, in fact, no, it's when the political rhetoric is divisive and it's just us and them. It's this war on terror. It's the legislation that has the white paper, the
yeah.
different
Yeah.
papers that we've had
That's
here in Australia. It's the demonization of refugees and those seeking asylum. It's
yeah.
the whole, Sharia. It's these conversations that
Right.
come as a result of the global events that that then is the issue. If we take care in recent terms here, times in Australia, if you remember Fatima Payman and her resignation, so she resigned, and then immediately Dutton, and there's conversations about,
Mhm.
MBM, Muslim votes, et cetera, et cetera. Is she now going to start a party or join MBM or Muslim votes?
Mm.
That rhetoric from Dutton say, oh, it's going to be, I wouldn't want to see that happen. If you recall what he said,
Mhm.
then we saw a rise in Islamophobia. So it wasn't the
Oh,
event itself; it is the conversations that politicians have that for us indicates, and we've seen it, on the ground, but we academics has also seen it. So this is why political rhetoric,
yes.
responsible political rhetoric, is one of the major factors in whether we see an increase or a decrease or not at all of
So,
Islamophobia.
Doctor, that's a really interesting point that you make, because there's a lot of talk about social cohesion, and the importance of social cohesion, which is advocated by politicians and government, etc. So, and one of the points that you said, one of the things that you do is advocacy, working with policymakers, etc. So, knowing that, having that kind of insight, has that been shared with policymakers? Has it been shared with government officials? And what is the response to identifying that really interesting and powerful insight?
Yeah, we haven't. I'll be completely honest with you. That probably hasn't been shared with them as much as we'd like.
Yeah.
And I'll be completely honest. We don't have the attention that we don't have the attention of the government as much as we'd like. I certainly have stated that in all of my different task force and roles that I'm on, but I don't know, but there hasn't been feedback as to, yes, we'll change and stuff. But that just means we have to keep advocating. We have
Yeah,
to keep
absolutely.
advocating. We have to keep advocating. And I think with our next report, we can advocate stronger because we didn't have, the timeline. We didn't have the academic rigor and analysis. But thank you so much for that, Masoom, because this is now something that we can say, this is the academic literature, and this is what we're seeing on the ground. This is when the peak is. We need you to do something about it. And I get really frustrated with the term social cohesion. I usually roll my eyes. I prevented myself from
Yeah.
doing that because social cohesion is such a loaded concept.
Mm.
And I, usually argue that before we try to talk about social cohesion, we need to talk about social exclusion because in order
Mm.
for us to have a socially cohesive society, you need to have also a society that people can feel included. And
Yes.
right now Muslims don't feel included, and if we look at what is happening in what has happened and what is happening in Gaza, but now also the West Bank, let's not shy away from the fact
Yep.
that there's still a genocide happening.
Yes.
Just because it doesn't get that media attention, that it's still happening. There's still, still violence. There's still war crimes that are happening
Mm.
within in the West Bank itself. So, in terms of the trends, so let me go back to your question. In terms of the
Yeah, I'm
trends,
really interested to
yeah,
understand the nature of the incidents. So
yeah.
obviously you've seen, I think it's
We've seen a
13
massive rise.
increase.
Yep.
Yeah.
So let me put it into perspective. In the 8 years of the register's existence, we had 930 incidents reported to us. So over 8 years, 930 incidents report to us. In the 1 year after the 7th of October, so 7th of October 2023
Mm.
to 7th of October 2024, we had 932 incidents in the
Oh,
year.
wow.
So we've had more in 1 year than we've
In eight
had over
years.
8 years.
Wow.
So this is the context in which we're operating from. How does this translate? Well, at the moment, so we're looking at 72 weeks. So every single week I do the data crunching just to see where we're at. So 72 weeks after the 7th of October 2023, we are now experiencing a 510% increase. So it has dropped from the immediate 3 weeks after the 7th of October 2023, but now is at a steady 510%. So it averages between
Wow.
500 to 600% in the last couple of months. Um, what are we seeing? We are
Yeah.
seeing, the majority of the victims are still Muslim women.
Yes.
So that is still very much a gendered violence space.
And
And because yeah,
is that because they are visibly Muslim? Is that what drives that difference?
yes and no. So
Okay.
this is where, yeah, I mean, you would think surface, yeah, because they're visible. But then we have, Muslim brothers who wear the thobe, Muslim brothers
Yes.
who wear the, kufi and
Mm,
stuff. And yet, so we should see the equivalent of that, because our reporting tool actually asks us that, did you wear something that was visibly Muslim?
yes.
And so it's not necessarily the visibility, although that is a marker of a person's public expression of Islam. But why we call it gendered Islamophobia is that there is a it's a combination, and it's a really weird combination of them being visible, but because there's been so much scapegoating of and generalization of Muslim women being oppressed, and
Yes. Yes.
there's a combination of that as well. So, and vulnerability, so with there's vulnerability, so it's very much a coward act,
Yes.
of Islamophobia, because more often than not, these women are by themselves, and
I was
usually
going
with
to ask
children,
that
not
question. Yes.
necessarily with a man.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Okay.
Yeah,
That's
so it's still very much a gender. So over 70%, like between 70 and 75% of victims are women. And it is usually when they're on public transport. So this is something that
okay.
is concerning. It's usually in a public space. So it's not different from our last report. It could be shopping centers. It's out and
Mm,
about where there are a lot of people. Obviously, the impact of this is detrimental for many women who rely on public transport. So then they would avoid going out or have to have somebody go with them. I know that there are Muslim women who refuse to leave the house unless their son or a brother or a father or a husband accompanies them. So this limits and excludes them from society. And I don't want to be too alarmist, but there is a researcher in the UK, and her name's Dr. Amina Sharaf, I think, or Sharif. And she gives a brilliant podcast on the Thinking Muslim,
yes.
where she actually talks about Islamophobia as a death dealing endgame. Now that sounds wow. You're like, how does something that is just could perhaps sounds pretty benign if somebody's
Yeah.
just yelling at you and
Trivial.
etc.
Yeah.
But she uses evidence in terms of exclusion from society, exclusion from the workforce, exclusion from health. They may, if they've had a bad experience in the hospital, they may not go back
Oh,
to
wow.
seek health care. Even just the social mobility. Muslims have, we know that the ABS tells us that Muslims have the highest attainment of education in terms of
Mhm.
PhD and stuff, and yet it doesn't translate
Yes.
into the jobs that we get. The
Opportunities. Yes.
reality is that
Yes.
if you have a Muslim sounding name or an Arab sounding name, the unconscious bias means you can't even get a foot in the door. So your livelihood, your marginalization, the mental health impact, these all, she argues, leads to a slow death of Muslims. If Palestine
Wow.
is anything to, Palestine is anything for us to look at,
Yeah.
the reality is, yes, there is a separation of anti-Palestinian racism and Islamophobia, and there is that distinction. However, the reality is, and I've been involved in pro-Palestinian solidarity for the last 25 years, and I can tell you that if the majority of Palestinians were anything else but Muslim, we wouldn't be still having this conversation.
Yeah.
So, yes, there are Christians, there are Druze, there are Palestinians, but the fact of the matter is that they have been racialized to
Yes.
be connected to or related to Islam and Muslims.
Yeah.
And so it's not just a brown person, it's the brown Muslim person.
Yeah, and what
And
they've done
so,
is what you hear it in the language. Where
yep,
now they're branding it as one. It's sort of like the Islamist
yep,
pro-Palestinian mob, the
yep,
violent pro-Palestinian mob, and the
yep, yep.
Islamist.
Yeah. So really, that's what's structural. So if I can just go back to structural racism, because I
Yes.
think that's really important, is that we are operating in a structure that is that is so difficult to penetrate,
Mm.
that yes, we can, chase our tails in terms of the interpersonal racism. So we can deliver some fantastic programs on what Islam is, and trust me, I've been doing it for 25 years. I go to schools, I go to
Mm.
community groups, I do a lot of interfaith work on what Islam is, what Muslims are, what the Quran says, et cetera, giving them, a fantastic, what Muslims believe, either from John Esposito or from, Professor Halim Rain and his academic team at Griffith Universities. We can have all of these things and say that Islam, denounces, violence and, protects the rights of well, we can say all of this. But if the system is so racist,
Mm.
it we can there's only so much we can do on the ground. It is the political rhetoric, it is the leadership, it is the lack of compassion, the dehumanization of Muslims really since nine
Well,
eleven is what yeah.
there's one of the questions that actually talks to this, and I'll just go back to it. Is there a correlation between the rhetoric used by media outlets or stories and Islamophobia, which is what you're talking about as well?
Yeah,
Not
yeah.
sure. What
Because
role does the media play in this?
well, I mean, the media amplifies political rhetoric as well.
Mm.
So if they go hand in hand. So we'd like to just blame the media and then,
Yes,
sort of let the politicians and elected
get away
leaders
with
off
it.
the hook.
Yeah.
They go hand in hand. The reality is the media, yes, there is, pejorative, framing,
Mm.
and whether it is, our Hollywood films, and there's been plenty of study about, the demonization and stereotyping of Muslims in a certain way, a pejorative way. But then the political rhetoric is also really important, because what they have found, and this is where research is really important, and we actually talk about this in our next report, is that when political leadership is one of coming together,
Mm.
one of bringing people together rather than dividing people, there's less Islamophobia, there is more social cohesion. So political rhetoric is really important, and then responsible media framing is really important. But what we have here in terms of the structural racism, and this is where Rita, and Aman have done so well, is the whole dehumanization. So I think this is really key to it, is that the dehumanization of Muslim
Yes.
goes all the way back to the war on terror rhetoric since
Yes.
9/11. So the
Yeah.
pejorative language, the framing of all Muslims as dangerous, as terrorists to be feared, has continued to plague how we view each other. We
Yes.
view each other through this lens. And so this is unfortunately the political, public, and media discourse
Mm.
that we find ourselves in, and Muslims around the world find themselves in, and therefore the impact on that is just so much greater. So this
So
is
how
this
do
is
we
what
fight that?
I would
How do
term
we
ingrained structural Islamophobia.
And how do we try and combat that? I mean, and I want to get on to underreporting as well, because I think there's a role to play. I think the
Yep,
community has a role to play in
yep,
really dialing up how significant this issue is.
yep,
Because and you hear the rhetoric around, oh, there's no such thing as
yep,
Islamophobia, etc. But knowing that it is so deeply ingrained in the structure, how do we combat this now that we've got some data? Now we've actually got more awareness, and my assumption is with more awareness we get more reporting done. But I've got two
yep,
questions. So one of them is, we know there's a lot of underreporting that takes place.
yep,
And there was one comment that said, well, there is an assumption, if there's no point in reporting because they don't attend, they ignore it, we don't get the same attention as other communities do. So obviously there's that. But why there is a question here, why is there so much underreporting? And then how do we combat this structural racism
yep,
that we're experiencing?
yep. Great. So why is there underreporting? A lot of reasons. There's underreporting because people don't know that they can report. So exactly that. And sometimes they think that it's just a minor thing. Oh, somebody said
Mhm.
something to me,
Yes.
as they walk past. So therefore, it's just normalized. Or for Muslim women, sometimes they think this is part and parcel of what it means to be a Muslim woman, that this is my
Struggle.
test,
Yes.
this is my struggle, this is what it means to be a visible Muslim. This is my struggle. I just got to take it on the chin, chin up, be resilient. We hear this over and over, be resilient. And we encourage, resilience, obviously, but then we also encourage justice, and we encourage Muslims in particular to demand their rights. So when it comes to reporting, you are actually demanding your right to be treated justly, that a
Mm.
crime has occurred. And as a register, we will do our utmost best to case manage with you, to walk alongside you. We will do the advocacy for you, whatever it is you need to regain a sense of agency control. So we say for to many people, what is perhaps a very ugly and traumatic experience, and because that control has been taken away from you, your agency has been taken away from you, and now you're a victim of
Mm.
a crime. But by hopefully, registering it with us, then we can say, these are your options. Firstly, let's take care of you. How can we turn something so ugly into now a support place for you, a support group for you? Do you need one-on-one support? Do you need to be associated with the Muslim Women's Association? Do you need us to contact ICV or, others? But we can also then open up the doors for, do you need legal support? And this is all done pro bono. So you may not know what your options are, but we want
Yes.
Muslims to say, first and foremost, you are Australian. Do
Yes.
not let anyone take that away from you. You are Australian. You have every right to dress as you see fit, and walk, the streets, going about your everyday business in a safe manner. And so, as Muslims, and this is part of Islam as well, is that the justice. Let's seek justice. And in your case, if you report it, we can compile it all. We can
Mhm.
collate all the data, and we actually have something to go to, different sector partners, to go with government and say, this is what is needed from us. So to go back to why, I guess, why some forms of racism gets more attention than Islamophobia. I know we get this all the time, and there's a number of reasons. The structural racism that I talked about, when you're constantly being racialized and marginalized, your humanity, the hierarchy of humanity. I have, dismally accepted, and pessimistically accepted that unfortunately there is a hierarchy of humanity. Whose humanity matters more, you know? And
We've seen that
the
over the
reality,
last, we've seen that over the
yeah.
last
And
16,
the
17 months.
reality is, what we are witnessing is that Muslim blood isn't that important. The fact that, you have the Sydney Harbour Bridge, in New South Wales, or you have here in Queensland, you have the Story Bridge lit up in blue and white, to support Israel. And you've got nothing, no show of solidarity for the at least, according to Lancet, 200,000 Palestinians, and that's a really, really estimate,
Mm.
of people who've been killed, and yet there is no show of solidarity with Palestinians. So what are Palestinians, Arabs, Muslims, and those that support Palestine? What are they meant, to think that their humanity doesn't matter, that their government doesn't see them, as being equal,
Yeah.
to, as a sign of compassion and what have you. So it is difficult, but at the same time, we need to mobilize, and I think we
Yeah.
need
So
everyone.
a, a really important question I'd
Yeah,
like to ask you, because I experienced this myself. I actually didn't know what a hate crime is. So, and therefore it's like, well, why would I report it? Because it was just a comment made. It's not a hate crime.
yeah,
And it was a
yeah,
pretty horrific comment that was made to me. And I ended up reporting it because I thought, hang on a second, if I don't report this and this is becoming common, then no one will know this is happening. So
yeah,
I'd like you to help us understand what constitutes a hate crime. Because I used to think
yeah,
it was
I
just,
think,
you getting hit, you getting violent,
yeah.
but it's more than that.
It is definitely more than that. A lot of people don't know, I guess, the lesser known hate crimes. I think that's
Yes.
that's probably what you're referring to. So, by definition, hate crimes are criminal acts, and they're committed against individuals or groups based on their race, their ethnicity, their religion, their orientation, gender identity, disability, or other
Yeah.
protective characteristics. And I like you just mentioned, many people are familiar with the violent hate crimes, like the physical
Yes.
assaults, but there's also the arson attacks, but then there's like vandalism or even like cyber harassment and doxing now here in Australia, hate speech leading to violence, as we've seen in New South Wales, even like employment discrimination crimes, so denying somebody a job or firing them or harassing them in the workplace because of their race, religion, or identity, especially when it involves threats of vandalism. That's also, hate crimes, desecration of religious or cultural sites that, relates to us, um, bias motivated false accusations. So those are all aspects, and even graffiti, because somebody said, oh, graffiti is not a hate crime. It is a hate crime because it is targeting an individual or a group of
Mm.
individuals based on their religions, or whatever protective factors as well.
Yes. So, Doctor, one common comment that tends to be spouted amongst the non-Muslim community, which I've been a recipient of, is the whole region of Muslims should just be nuked. The whole area should just be carpet bombed. Is that considered hate crime because it incites violence?
Absolutely.
Okay, that's good to
Absolutely.
know
Yep.
because it's a very common
And
statement that we tend to
yeah.
endure.
Yeah, yeah. And the thing is, it goes even beyond just like our register. So if that came to us, and let's just say it's an online one, because sometimes, a lot of these things are online,
Mm.
which is sometimes fantastic because if it's not a pseudonym, if it's not a bot and it is a real person, then we can actually get police involved. So
Right.
if we know, and the AFP as well. So we have actually sent a death threat. So I'll give an example of something that's happened to us on the Islamophobia Register, our social media page. So right after the pager, the assaults, Israeli assault on Lebanon, the war crime with the pagers blowing up, somebody left a threat on the Islamophobia Register Instagram page and wrote something related to pagers. Now that is a threat because we know that pagers in that context related to violence of killing people inadvertently. And so when we received that, I immediately rang up my contact in the Australian Federal Police, who confirmed yes, and this is what we say: send everything to us and we
Yeah.
will ask the right authorities. So please, please, please send everything so that we can get a picture of what's happening. And he said, yep, that's a hate crime, send it to us. We sent it to them. We then also, when the New South Wales police heard about it, they also, investigated it. So now we've got the New South Wales police as well as the AFP looking into this specific act. So that is considered hate crime. So any threat against you or groups of people is considered a hate crime, and it does have consequences. Now it has I guess a stricter legislation, especially in New South Wales in recent times. But can I just mention one thing about what we can do as a community and
Yes.
why other groups are able to perhaps get more attention
Mm.
to, hate crimes against them? The reality is that I think so what I have been advised is that other communities have so many victims ready to share their story with the
Mm.
media.
Mm.
And so when the register and other organizations that are engaged in combating Islamophobia, we can put out fantastic media releases. We can call up the media. We can, do all of these things. But the media wants the lived experience from the victims themselves. And all too often, our victims are too shy to come
Yes.
forward,
Yes.
or they don't want to be in the spotlight for fear,
Yes.
and rightfully so, fear of the reprisal of coming forward, and
Yeah,
they would get more
and
Islamophobic
you were
attacks.
talking about structural racism.
Yep.
It's sort of like, well, hang on, what's going to happen to my career and so on.
Yeah.
So you're more likely to just pull back and just stay silent.
Yeah. Yeah. So it all, my Zoom, thank you so much. It all comes down to structural racism. So
Yeah.
what do? We need to change the
Yes.
system.
Yes.
We need to change the system. We need to get more like-minded people who are not about greed, who are not about politics, who are about bringing people together,
Mm.
who are not about, relating to one another based on legal consequences. And this is,
Yes.
I think, the problem we have. So I get asked all the time, do we need stronger legislation? I said yes and no. Stronger legislation doesn't, I don't think, actually breaks the cycle of the violence. You need to break the cycle of violence in attitudes and how we relate to one another on a human capacity. So don't dehumanize each other. Let's
Yes.
remove this dehumanization from each other. I will relate to you, my Soom, as a human being, as my fellow human being with dignity and rights. And it's my moral imperative to treat you with dignity, not because I will get in trouble with the law, but it's your human dignity that demands of it. I think we need a whole shift, really, in how we deal with one
It's
another. So I'm talking about,
dismantling decades of, this is systemic, and it is, how do you break that up? We're talking
yeah,
about this is decades of building this,
yeah.
and how do we start to break that down?
We break that down by making sure we elect people, and this is where MVM comes in. We
Yeah.
elect people who have the same values that we want, and we punish politicians who don't. It's as
Yes.
simple as that. If we are too, afraid of, because the reality is, they show their true colors. They're not
Mm.
hiding their true colors. They're telling us exactly how they will vote on certain matters. We hear it over and over and
Yeah.
over again. And so, what we need, because it's structural, is to get the right people in these structures to be able to be representative of the values of humanity that we want, that is based on compassion, that is based on inclusivity, that brings people together, not based on greed,
Yes.
not based on exploitation, not based on dehumanization, and not based on manufacturing fear. So, structural racism against Muslims is the manufacturing the fear of the other.
Yeah.
So, and as Muslims, we should also, while we're feeling under siege, and rightfully so, our data shows we should be feeling under siege, but we also then need to find allies in other racialized communities to work with us alongside. So it is the coming together of
Yeah.
racialized minorities and demanding, justice for all racialized communities. We should not be happy that another community is being racialized.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
I give the example of, for example, the negative attitudes against Muslim and Islam fell during COVID time. So this is social
Oh,
cohesion,
wow.
right?
Okay.
So, social cohesion report from the Scanlon Foundation found that attitudes against Muslims and negative attitudes against Muslims and Islam fell during COVID. It's one of the lowest, and because it was now just Asian racism because of COVID. So anybody that
Ah,
looked
right. So
Asian,
someone
so
else
it
gets
was,
replaced.
yeah, it's just another group. So I mean, as Muslims, we can say, okay, it's
But
we're no longer the
we don't
plague
want
group,
another
but
group. Yes.
no, like all incidents of hate
Yes.
is detrimental to all of us, and we should aspire to be a nation that is better than this. We should aspire to be a nation that upholds, human
Mm.
rights. And if we have elected officials that do not uphold human rights, then we need to make sure that we don't give them our vote. So that is our strongest thing that we can possibly do, if not with the money to fund, organizations,
Yes.
but then it is with a pen or a pencil and the ballot paper, and vote them out. This is what we need to do.
Yeah. I might just go through some of the questions. Before I do that, I might just post a few links for the audience. Um, these are just links that I'm going to put in the chat for you to get more involved in any way you can. So please share some of these links with your family and friends. So just give me 1 second. We've also got a 2-minute survey to submit, just some feedback survey that would be very much appreciated by all of us at MVM, as it allows us to make sure that we continue doing more of what works and continue improving more of what needs improvement, particularly with what Dr. Noura has just so eloquently stated. So I might just pop something in our chat and then I'll go to the questions. Okay. There we go. We got some links in there. Oh, maybe hang on.
Do you want me to do it as just mentioned while you continue?
Yeah, it's because I've
Yes.
got
Yeah, I
I've
see
got
some questions. Do you want me to
too
just
much
respond
text.
to those questions, my Sue?
I've just sent it. Yeah, I just had
Okay.
too many letters. Okay, so there were two. So we'll go back to the school one. Here we go. Do you have any incident reports occurring at schools or universities? And are you aware of APAN's anti-Palestinian racism in schools register?
Yes, the answer is yes. We've got data for universities, the encampment. In fact, I visited the encampments in Brisbane, and I know my team also, visited encampments across the country when it was happening to offer our support to the students. So we're well aware of that. We've also been working with VCs at these universities and advocating for the students. So, for example, University of Sydney, we work very closely with many of them. Even when the police would not submit a report, we still submitted a report, for instance, on one of the assaults, and we continue to advocate for the students. So I think that that's really important. That if you feel that you're not getting anywhere with the police, please reach out to us. I'm known to be quite persistent, in my own way, because I think it's really important that individuals, if they feel they're not getting anywhere with any of the authorities, they can reach out to us, and we will do our very best to continue. My favorite word is agitating. Like, we just won't. If you're not happy with it, let's look at other ways in which we can ensure that you get the justice that you need. So yes, so we're well aware of that, and we do share data with APAN. And in fact, when APAN started their anti-Palestinian register, we assisted them with the modeling. And can I just say, in terms of the allyship, we do work very closely. Part of the Islamophobia register, we have a really large and diverse board, and one of the researchers who is involved in the Islamophobia report number 5 is Palestinian himself, so he brings that whole lived experience as well. So our connection to Palestine and APAN is very close, and so yes, we do have data on that, and we do work with APAN.
Okay, just I might just go through some of the other questions. The work you do is important and superb. Thank you to you and your team. What is the success rate in terms of the complaints you receive?
It depends on what you mean by success. So from the victims themselves, we have had a really high success rate of them finding, the reporting to be quite empowering. Like, and the fact that, they have somewhere to go to, and they have a person to be able to speak to, and they have, sort of support, to assist them with their healing. So in terms of with the police, or in terms of the different ones, some are still ongoing, and yeah, so it's really hard to be able to quantify what the success is. It depends on which aspect of the services that they need.
Okay, great. Just a few minutes. So, Doctor, I've just got a question to end, and before I sort of just do a quick closing. What are the registry's goals for the future, and how can people contribute to your work, and how can they support your team?
Yeah. So the reality is that, Islamophobia isn't very sexy. So we have been able to really expand our work in the last, like I said, 2 years. Well, not even 2 years, probably the last year. We've been able to expand our work because of funding that we received. Now that funding will expire, and this is, we're not going. It's going to really expire by the end of this year. So I'm doing my utmost best to look for, sustainable funding. And the reason why it's really important is again the advocacy, but really the support for the victims. We need to have a place where victims can come to and get the healing that they need. So if anybody knows of anybody that would like to donate to us, that this is really important. But we also need you to have conversations in your own circles. So if you hear anything about, what's happening, please just honestly send me an email. I can make my email known to everybody, but it's just executivedirector@islamophobia.com.au. If you come across something, on the streets or online, just flick it over to us, and we will do everything. So I think the more awareness of what we do, so please spread it out. Bystander intervention is so important. If you see something, if it's safe, please intervene. So many times, victims have said that, and especially Muslim women in the public space will get spat on, will get assaulted, physically and verbally, and nobody comes to their aid. Everybody picks up their phone to record it, but nobody actually goes and says, "How are you okay? Can I help you?" So we have quite a number of resources on our website, including resources on how to intervene safely, how to be an upstander, so that we can get everybody to take responsibility for everybody's safety. And I think that's really important. And if you want to volunteer with us, please, just let me know what you can do. We are such a, we're a nationwide organization that works around the clock. I mean, this week I work 7 days, just because we are a bit of a crisis. Islamophobia is not a 9 to 5 job. It can happen, at midnight. It can happen at 1 a.m. And we want to be the ones to be able to respond to the victim as soon as we possibly can. So if we have more hands on deck to help us with victim support, if you think you'd like to reach out, or you are great with media, or you're great with IT, whatever it is, all that help will assist us. But really, it is paramount that we come together to dismantle the cycle of violence and dismantle the cycle of division that certain people of influence and certain people in power want us to do, because they've got the money and they've got the power in order to do exactly what they want. And then this is where people power can say, absolutely not. We will, if you show that is your true color of wanting to divide us, that's not what we're about. We're going to elect people who are for human rights, for justice, to ensure that everybody is treated with dignity and respect as they should be.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Doctor. You've been amazing. Very, very insightful, very useful. I learned a lot from your session. So yeah, thank you so much. Has anyone got any other questions before we close the session? I'm just gonna hand over to Hanif before we do. Hang on, one's come through. In the wake of the tragic murder of Imam Mohsin last night, we are faced with a complex challenge of navigating the delicate balance between combating Islamophobia and addressing the LGBTQIA phobia that exists in parts of the Muslim community. How can we foster understanding and embrace inclusivity while recognizing the deep-seated fears and prejudice that affect this intersection?
I think we've reached the end of our time, Sister Mason, so we might have to let everyone go and take this one on notice and respond after.
Yeah.
If I can just jump in, Sister Mason, just before everyone has to go. I know it's been a long session. First of all, thank you, Sister Mason, for leading and hosting the webinar. You did a fantastic job. And Dr. Dora, amazing, amazing, amazing insights. Before everybody goes, I just wanted to quickly do a quick call out for everybody. So you'll start seeing MVM volunteers, hopefully soon. We're all out there at our masjids, outside at shopping centers, engaging with the public, doing things like flyer drop-offs and doing things like putting flyers on cars and engaging with the community, speaking to them, running educational sessions for different community groups, etc., etc. So all of this is happening, and all of this is being powered and funded by volunteers. So we need your help. Anybody who's thought of doing anything, even if you have 1 hour a week, it makes a huge, huge difference. We'll get you an MVM t-shirt, free merchandise. You'll be representing, you'll be part of the movement to help us achieve what we need to achieve at this upcoming federal election. So please do get onto our website and just fill out on the volunteer tab. Just express your interest, and a member of our team will get in touch with you. And the other thing, that's in the lead up to the election, especially with Ramadan coming up. But the other thing is actually on election day. So we need to man the booths at all of our in all of our key electorates. So we need something like 3,000 people, inshallah, to inshallah means God willing, for any non-Muslims we have on the call with us today as well. We need 3,000 people to man the booths to represent MVM and to hand out how to vote cards. to everybody at the booths on election day, so we can compete with all the other major political parties and everybody else. So if you're able to dedicate 3 hours, most likely it's a 3-hour shift on election day to man a booth, please do also encourage your family to do so as well. Jump on the website, fill out that volunteer form, hopefully. I will hand back to Sister May soon to wrap up for us, but thank you all for attending, and thanks for your